Sahana bhavatu, Sahana bhunaktu, Saha viryam karavavahe, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma vidvisavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May He protect us. May He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Peace, peace, peace. So, good morning. Welcome to the class. So we've been studying the Kathopanishad. And as most you know, in the Kathopanishad, he tells a story about Nachiketa, a little boy that his father is performing this worship in which he's supposed to give away the best of all his possessions to others. But Nachiketa notices that his father is giving away the worst of his possessions, the old cows that have eaten their last grass and all. And so he thinks to himself, if my father is performing this worship in such a poor, shoddy fashion, surely some bad result is going to come to him. And so then he begins to ask his father, Father, to whom do you give me? And he asks again and again, and finally father gets angry, and he says, I give you to Yama, the god of death. So as you know, Nachiketa, he then goes to the abode of Yama, and when he gets there, Yama is out somewhere, and so for 3 days and 3 nights, he sits by Yama's door without any food or water or anything. Then Yama comes back. He learns from his household people that this little Brahmin boy has been here for 3 days without any food or nourishment or hospitality. And this is considered a great sin. As you know, in Indian culture, the guest, Atithi, is considered a manifestation of God. And there's a great emphasis in Hindu society or Indian society on treating guests well. And you find that when you go to India. They treat you so well everywhere you go. So anyway, this is considered a great sin, particularly for a Brahmin, to be treated disrespectfully like this. So then Yama apologizes to Nachiketa. And he said, because you've been here for 3 days, I'll give you 3 boons. And so the first boon that Nachiketa asked for is that his father will forgive him, that he won't be angry anymore, and that when he goes back, his father, from the abode of Yama, that his father will recognize him again and take him back with love as before. Then the second boon that Nachiketa asked for is how to perform that sacrifice by which a person can attain immortality in heaven. And so Yama shows him the technique of how to perform this particular sacrifice. And Nachiketa is such a good student that Yama says, from now on, this sacrifice will be called the Nachiketa fire worship in honor of you. But then Nachiketa, he comes to the third boon. And for this boon, Nachiketa says that when death occurs, there is always a debate on whether anything, in other words, the soul, continues. Some say it does, and others say it does not. I beg to be enlightened by you so that I may know the answer. Of the boons, this is the third I ask for. So this is Nachiketa. He wants to know the truth about who are we really? What is spirit? Does spirit actually exist? Does soul actually exist? And it's a great question, which is kind of like that. Now I mentioned, talked in one of our previous classes. During the time Swami Varadananda was here in America, late 1800s, one of the biggest spiritual movements in America was called spiritualism. This is where they would hold seances, and somebody's grandmother would come and they would talk to her and things like this. Now this actually was very significant in America because it was called piercing the veil. That basically a lot of religious people were there in America. They went to church every Sunday. They heard all about heaven and this and that, but nobody knew. Nobody had any idea. Once a person died, they had no idea, no experience of what happened then. And so being able to say, oh yes, my grandmother is still there, or my mother is still there, this was like really significant at that time. simply because nobody knew. And so, like this, Nachiketa asked Yama, well, what's the truth about this? Do people actually exist, continue to exist after death? Is there something immortal there, or isn't there? In other words, what's the truth of the reality of things? And at first, Yama tries to dissuade him. He said, this is a very difficult question. Even the gods aren't sure about it. And then he says, instead of that, why don't I give you pleasure? I can give you wealth, progeny, cattle, long life, celestial maidens, anything you want, anything at all that you can think of that you would like, I can give it to you. But don't ask this question. But Nachiketa, despite all these gifts which Yama offers, he wants to know the truth. He said, no, I know that all these things are ephemeral, all these things are only temporary. Even the longest life is only something temporary. And so he begins to, he says, I want to know the truth. And so then Yama says, okay, I was testing you and I see that you're a fit student, you're ready for this knowledge. And then Yama begins to teach him. Now, the Kathopanishad is like the Bhagavad Gita in the sense that the first chapter in the book, basically it just sets the scene. It tells the story about Nachiketa and how he goes to go to Yama and all. In the same way, the Gita, in the first chapter is just how Krishna takes Arjuna's chariot out between the two armies and he sees him there. The actual teaching doesn't start until chapter 2. So in the same way, the Kathopanishad, the actual teaching began in chapter 2 of the first part. And the very first line, the very first verse in part 1 of chapter 2 is the good and the pleasant are two different things. They serve different purposes. Each is, however, a bondage, though not in the same sense. He who chooses the good does good to himself, but he who chooses the pleasant misses the purpose of life. So this is the first teaching of Yama to Nachiketa, that there's presented before man two choices, the path of the pleasant or the path of the good, preyas or shreyas. I think I mentioned that the very first talk I ever heard by Swami Varadananda back in 1970, I think was on this very verse itself. I remember talking about preyas and shreyas. So this teaching basically is like the main theme. It gives like the main theme of the whole Upanishad. Each one of us is presented with the path of the pleasant. That means the ability to enjoy life. And this is what most people are on. They look at life and they say, oh, I want to do this, and I want to have this, and I want to go eat in this restaurant, and I want to go to Bahamas on vacation. And like that, all our attention is absorbed on getting things in the world. I want to get a lot of money and this and that. And this is where we are focused, and because of that, we tend to experience both material good and material bad. Pleasure and pain both come together because they're part, like heads and tails, they're part of the same coin. So, and this is what most people get involved in. We get so caught up in our daily life, our daily wants and ambitions, and our enjoyment of things, that our consciousness becomes purely material. This path then leads, as Yama tells later, it leads to death. In other words, we become the body. Okay, I'm this body, and I'm through this body, I'm enjoying things, but then the body is going to get old and worn out and eventually die. And so, but then again, the soul, it'll take on another body to experience more pleasure, and so forth. It keeps going, time and time again. See, the problem is that when the body is young and healthy, it's great fun. I remember when I was 20, you could do anything, and next day you'd wake up and you'd feel fine. Later on, though, as you're getting older, the body starts to get worn out. It doesn't have the energy it had before, and it also can start to develop ailments and pains and aches and all kinds of difficulty. But because we grabbed hold of the body so much in order to enjoy through the body, when it starts to go downhill, we're still grabbing hold of it. And this is the case with most people, is that they grab hold of the body consciousness, the physical existence. For a while, they get pleasure out of it, they get happiness. But then, slowly, life starts to kind of deteriorate, but now they're holding on to it, and so they're just drugged through all these experiences of suffering and pain. Swami Varadananda in San Francisco, he said, here's an example which I mentioned before, how suppose you're in a room and then suddenly the walls start to close in on you. And they start closing more and more. And this, as I mentioned, when I was a kid, we'd go to the Saturday matinee movie, and they used to have cliffhangers, you know, like a little 15-minute movie. And it'd always be the hero, at the end of the 15 minutes, the hero would be just about ready to fall off a cliff or do something, and then you come back next week and see how he got out of it. Well, one of their standard things was that the hero would be in a room, and suddenly all the walls would start coming in. And suddenly, sometimes knife blades would come out of the walls and things. But then you come back next week and you find, oh, he got through a hole in the ceiling and got out. So like that, life is like that. We start out and you're in this room, this physical existence, and you think, oh, I've got all the freedom in the world. When we're young, basically the whole world is open to us. There's no limit to what we can do. But as we get along, we find more and more we're narrowing it down. When you were a teenager or when you're young, all the options were kind of open to you. But then you decide, okay, well, I'm going to major in this in college, then I'm going to get this job. And now, instead of freedom, you find every morning I have to get up and I have to go to this job. Every morning I have to commute. Every week I have to do my laundry. And like that, you find your whole life getting narrower and narrower, and your options tend to dry up, so that you're just what they call the rat race. You're just moving along in this routine, and this whole great freedom and things that was there earlier, it gradually gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And so this is the experience. So this is the path of prayas, the path of the pleasant. If you grab hold of it and you think, oh, I'm going to enjoy the world, I'm going to conquer the world, and then pretty soon you're finding yourself kind of caught up in things, and then by the time that happens, usually you're so used to being in physical consciousness that you're so absorbed in it that you can't kind of get out of it. You don't know how to get out of it, or even when it turns back. Now, on the other hand, the path of Shreyas, the path of the good, means you begin to look within, to search for the truth. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to have this, I'm going to get a new car, and I'm going to do this, instead of all this kind of petty everyday stuff, you start to question, well, what is life all about? Who is God? What is God? How can I serve God? How can I become united with God? You begin to seek what's the reality. The reality, first of all, who am I? What am I? And also then, what is God? What is the universe? And you begin to kind of look for the answers, the truth, the reality behind the experience. So this is called the path of the Shreyas, of the good, because it's gradually starting to lead the soul out of its entanglement into all material consciousness, gradually leading that soul back into spiritual consciousness. And so, as Yama says, the wise, they choose the path of the Shreyas. They look at the world, they say, all these things are ephemeral. I know all these things will come and go. And so instead of seeking all of their happiness, all of their satisfaction, all of their success and victories, instead of seeking it in the external world, they begin to look within. And as they do this, gradually, they begin to uncover this wonderful realm of the presence of God, the presence of Brahman, the source of the whole universe. They begin to discover that this whole realm is there within themselves. And then they make also a very important discovery, is that in the world, we're all trying to find certain things. We're trying to find happiness. We're trying to find peace of mind. We're trying to find power, we're trying to find wisdom, understanding, all these things we're trying to find out in the world. But as you redirect your kind of inquiry, your search, you begin to discover that, oh, all these things are here within. An external event. Say you say, okay, I want to be a billionaire, I want to make $1 million, and you succeed. You get $1 million, but you find, well, I'm still not happy, I'm still not satisfied. Now, most people then they go for 2 million and so on, but you realize that even if you get what you're seeking, it may give you a little pleasure for a while, but even after a while, even if it's a good thing that you really like, after a while it's just there. I had the experience that you've got an old computer and you're perfectly happy with it. Then somebody else comes along and says, oh, this is such a slow, clunky computer, you need to get a new one. And then you get a new one. And you think, wow, this is wonderful, this is so great. But after a while, then it's just what it is. You don't think about it anymore. For example, if somebody from the Middle Ages was to come in this world now, and realize that all you have to do to get light is to flick a switch and say, oh, that's a miracle. This was what a wonderful thing, what an amazing thing. But how much happiness do we get out of our light switch? It's just there. If we had the light torches all the time, it'd be a big nuisance. But after a while you say, okay, it's just there. And then you're either happy or unhappy according to what's going on inside you. And this is what ultimately happens. The person on the path of the pleasant, he's always trying to find his happiness from other people or other situations or possessions, things like that. And eventually, he gets disappointed. Eventually, things change. He loses the things he loves or the things he relied on for his happiness, or they change. But anyway, things eventually tend to fall apart in the external world. But when a person begins to uncover what's inside, within, then he begins to find out the happiness, peace, fearlessness, all these are here. And the thing is that if you're happy inside, all your experiences become happy. If you're not happy inside, then no matter what you do, you're going to be unhappy. There was a rich lady who went on a round-the-world cruise, and afterwards, one of her friends asked her, said, well, how was your cruise? And the lady said, well, cruise was fine, but it's just too bad I had to bring myself along. That if you're unhappy, then you just bring your unhappiness. You may bring it to a nice hotel or a cruise ship or something, but you'll be unhappy. On the other hand, if you're happy, you don't need anything in the outside world. It comes fine, you enjoy it. You say, oh yeah, that's fine, that was really nice. But you don't miss it if it's not there. And like that, you don't depend upon anything or anybody outside for your happiness, because you're finding it where it actually is, which is in your own nature. And so then gradually a person begins to realize everything that I seem to be lacking, everything that seemed to be missing that I was looking for, I find it all right here. And you realize that, well, the world is there, I find that it's, you don't need anything there, anything to provide you happiness, because you've got the happiness. So this is the great idea that is on the path of the pleasant, you're always looking for a new source of enjoyment, a new source of pleasure, a new source of satisfaction, and so forth. But in the inner realm, you find the joy, the satisfaction. Everything you're seeking begins to unfold from within you. And this is the path of the Shreyas, the good. It's slowly revealing more and more of your own divine nature, of the divine presence that's behind you and behind the entire universe. So this, in part 1, in chapter 2, then, this was the first teaching that Yama gave to Nachiketa. It's these two paths are there, the pleasant and the good. The person who follows the path of the pleasant, he gets just entangled all the time and ends up coming back again and again to the world. But the person who follows the path of the Shreyas, of the good, he's moving in the right direction and gradually unfolding the infinite kind of reality that's within. Now last week, we had gotten up to part 2. This was in, the first one was in part 1, chapter 2. But then last week, we got into part 2, chapter 1, and the very first verse here, again, kind of sets the theme for the whole Upanishad. It says that the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent effect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. So in this part 2, this is again a kind of major theme of this Upanishad, is that the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with this defect, is that they're always looking outside. They're always looking away from who we are into an external world, and because of that, we can see what's outside, but we're not aware of what's inside. And this is where our ignorance, our ajnana, our problems come from. In Swami Varadananda's commentary, he says, the self is within us, yet we do not see it. This is because our organs are outgoing. They can see things outside, but not inside. The self is the real master of the body-mind complex, and it is within us, hidden. It is also very subtle. The organs can perceive gross objects outside, but not the self, which is our innermost being. The only way to reach the self within is to withdraw the organs from the external things and turn them inside. The process is like reversing the course of a river and pushing it back to its source. It is a hard task, but it can be done. It is a matter of practice. Those who succeed attain immortality. So actually Brahman, the ultimate source of the whole universe, the ultimate source of all beings, of all creation, that very Brahman, that infinite Brahman, is within each and every person. But we're not aware of it. And the reason we're not aware of it is because we're always looking outside. And it's like somebody can be right behind you, but say you're looking in this direction, somebody can be standing right behind you, and even though they're very close, you don't see them, you're not aware of it, because you're looking in the wrong direction. As soon as you turn around, you go, and you're right here. Well, like that, because all of our attention is going outside, we're not aware of what's inside. And in order to, and basically spiritual life or spiritual practice is a process of reversing that. So instead of always being focused on what's outside, what's external to ourselves, we begin to look within of what's inside, what's within me. And ultimately, this leads us back to the awareness, the consciousness of our real self, the Atman, which is the same as the Brahman, the consciousness, which is us, which is our real self. That's consciousness is actually Brahman's consciousness, Chit consciousness, Sat Chidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. Everything ultimately has its source in Brahman. Just like all the waves ultimately have their source in the ocean. Ultimately, they're just water. As waves, each wave is different. There's some big waves, some little tiny waves, all kinds of different shapes. But in essence, as water, they're all one and the same thing. So there's actually one consciousness, one reality, and only one, and it has manifesting in all the different beings in this universe. So that each and every one of us has that full presence of Brahman within. Each and one of us truly is that one infinite Brahman. But we're not aware of it. And this is because like I said, the senses are built to be outgoing, the mind is built to be outgoing, but behind the mind, behind the senses, is this what they call the sakshi, the witness consciousness, which is the consciousness which is using body and mind as instruments, which is operating the body and mind. The body by itself, it can't function. When a person dies, or when they're asleep or unconscious, the body doesn't do anything, because the consciousness, which was the power behind it, it's withdrawn. So we think, and this is in most people, we think, okay, I'm this body, and I'm this mind. I'm this personality, this sense of being a particular individual. Now that individual, that's mostly centered on the body and mind. I'm this particular person here. I was born in such and such place, and so many years ago I got through this school, this job, all these experiences. This is me. But that personal self is not you. It's the experiences of the instruments that are there, and you are something completely different, and you're actually, and your real self, you're actually the kind of force behind whatever happens. You're the kind of creative force. As bodies, as physical beings, we're very limited. Anything we do, in fact, it involves overcoming obstacles, overcoming difficulties. We want to get a nice house. And then we have to work 20 years in order to make the money, in order to get the house. But in our real self, our true self, everything we want is there. So there's nothing to inhibit God. God just says, let it be, and it is. But we've kind of cut ourselves off from that presence. So this is the source of all our problems, the source of our ajnana, our ignorance, is that we are always looking in the wrong direction. We're always looking to something outside ourselves. And even when we begin to look within, what we begin to find first of all is the mind. There's mental activity going on, there's emotions there, there's memories, different things are there, but it's only as you begin to go deeper that you begin to discover there's also the presence of God here within. There's the presence of this higher reality, and it becomes possible for a person to actually commune with that reality, to actually experience it, to actually begin to find it, that presence of soul, or spirit of coming into its life, and then it sees, begins to understand kind of the grandeur of its own nature, the wonder of its own nature, as well as the wonder of everybody else. Because that consciousness, which is our real self, that very same consciousness is equally the consciousness in everybody else. Because there's only the one consciousness, chit. And that consciousness is expressing itself through each and every body, each and every individual, like ideas in the mind of God, and which God is experiencing this world. Now, as long as we're focused on our individual self, then consciousness becomes that individual self, and we find ourselves cut off, separate from everything else. But when we begin to connect with the spiritual level within, then also we're beginning to connect with the universality, the oneness of things, and the distinctions between me being this particular body, you being that particular body, this person being that particular body. Those distinctions start to disappear in the awareness that there's the one consciousness here. It's like this world, it's like a big drama going on, but there's only one actor. In our normal state of mind, we see only the drama as it appears to be. We see the interaction between the different actors. But when you become aware of that deeper consciousness, and you realize, just the one self here. The person that I thought was a friend is actually the Lord Himself. The person I thought was an enemy, He's also the Lord Himself. And then your whole vision, your whole experience becomes completely transformed. And this is the thing, is that in spiritual kind of growth or evolution, It's not so much that you acquire a whole lot of new knowledge, or different things, like Holy Mother, you say, the realization doesn't mean you grow two horns, but you realize what the reality of things is. And in other words, the same world you're in now, the same life you're in now, the daily routine you're in now, that very thing can become filled with wonder as your consciousness gets changed, as your consciousness transforms. The very world which is just ordinary and plain before suddenly becomes something very sacred, something very wonderful. It becomes kind of the unfoldment of the divine. And so this is gradually where we're trying to move. As an individual, we've separated ourselves from God. We've been like the prodigal son. He was the son, as you remember, the rich farmer, and he got impatient to get his inheritance. So he said, Father, give me my portion of money now. And so the father finally, he said, all right, here. And then the younger son, he went off to the big city, began to celebrate. Every night was a party, and he had lots of friends and everything. But eventually his money ran out. And then all his friends left him, and he finally got a job taking care of somebody's pigs. And as you know, his salary was that he got to eat whatever the pigs didn't eat. So he was thinking, that's the worst, lowest servant in my father's house, so it's better than this. So let me go back to my father's house and I'll offer to be a servant. So like that, he went back to his father's house, but instead of the father being angry or making him a servant, he was overjoyed. He told his son to prepare the fatted calf and let's have a feast because he who was lost has returned. He actually got him. The Divine Mother, she's there, and she waited for us to get tired of playing and to come back to her. And then she's overjoyed to see us. So like that, as human beings, we are like that prodigal son. We have all the glory of God, all the power of God, all the love and goodness and the wisdom of God within us. But then we shut that out and we come down and we start to live our own personal life, trying to fulfill our own personal desires and wishes and ambitions, and become something very small. And something good, but sometimes also something very bad. And so like that, we go through life in a very limited kind of way, and often end up like the prodigal son of just exhausting all that energy and things we had when we were younger. We just kind of exhausted and find ourselves left with nothing practically, but kind of buried in life. And like that, we go through life after life after life. But when we begin to surrender to God, to change our standpoint from this is me, I'm the most important person in the world, I'm the most important person in the universe, when we begin to change that standpoint to a sense of surrender to God, thy will be done, let me be, thy will be done, then we begin to become transformed from the very limited, very ignorant, ordinary human being to being the child of God again, which is what we are and what we've always been. Swami Krishna, in one place, he said that it's very difficult to get rid of this idea of a personal self, of an ego. He said, you may get a glimpse once in a while in meditation, but then he says, like the scum on a pond, eventually it clears from it, but then it comes back in, covers it up again. So he says it's very hard to really get rid of the ego, this sense of separate individual existence. So he said, rather you should cultivate the ripe ego. Now the unripe ego, this is the ego of the egotistical person who says, I'm so well educated, I'm so rich, I'm so good looking, I'm so important. That ego is the unripe ego. He said, rather think of yourself as the child of God, the servant of God, the instrument of God. And then you'll be gradually transforming back into being one with God and of allowing God to function within you. It's like, Swami Krishna said that God's grace is always blowing, but we have to unfurl our sails. So it's like the sun is always shining, but we have the capacity to pull down all our shades and sit in darkness. It's Only when we open the shades, that automatically the sun's there, it's always been there, the light has always been there, but we've shut it out for so long that it takes time. Then we have to open the shades, and immediately the light of our own divinity, the light of the divine presence behind everything will start to kind of come into our consciousness and gradually then transform everything. But this is the crux. In the first book, first part, we had the basic message of these two paths, Prayas and Shreyas are there. We're now saying the same thing, that the Lord has created the sense organs which follow the path of the blessed, which get absorbed in the path of the blessed. He's created them so that they're by nature outgoing. They're looking away from who we are and away from the presence of God. We're looking towards the kind of the phenomenon that's there. We're following the path of the Prayas, the blessed. Rare indeed is the person who's able to reverse that process and begin to look within, and search within to find out who am I? This is one of their basic practices in Jnana Yoga, which was made famous by Ramana Maharshi, called Vichara, self-inquiry. You start thinking, well, who am I? Am I this emotion? Am I this memory? Am I this body? Am I this or that? And you begin to examine and try to find out, well, who is the real self here? But the devotee is part of how do I, building a relationship with God, of getting in touch with God, and having God become a living part of your life. And it kind of comes. As that happens, as that connection is made, then it begins to transform you and lift you up, and eventually you're moving. Instead of moving further and further away from God, you start to move back towards God. So this first verse said, in chapter 1, said, the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw the sense organs from external objects and see the self within. And then the second verse says, immature people run after external objects, and they invariably get caught in the widespread net of death. Wise people, however, know where true immortality is. That is why they reject everything in this world, knowing that these things are short-lived. So it is true that there are many temptations in the world, and our sense organs are naturally attracted to them. But if we cannot control our sense organs, we are lost. One temptation leads to another until there seems to be no way to escape. If there's such a thing as death, this is it. It is as if death has cast a net over us, and we are caught in its meshes. This is the fate of people who are short-sighted. They're like children. They are carried away by impulses and do not consider the pros and cons of what they do, and they invariably come to grief. But there are some people who are thoughtful and discriminating. They know that the world, including everything it has to offer, is ephemeral, which is why they do not want anything of it. They do not want anything of this world or even of the other world, heaven. They know that the self alone is real, and therefore they only want to know that. When they know the self, they know that they are the self. The self alone can give them peace and happiness, because peace and happiness are inside, in the self, and not outside. So the unwise people are the immature people who run after the external objects. They see them and they glitter and they look interesting, and so people get absorbed and spend all their time, chasing around. Sri Ramakrishna said it was like children playing at the beach, playing on the sand with little bits of colored glass, when all the time there were wonderful gems there in the ocean, if only they would look within. And it's like he told the parable about the woodcutter in the Holy Man. That once there was a woodcutter who had to work very hard. He would cut firewood and sell it for very little money, very, very poor money. I was when I was in India, and we were on dust time or so. kind of driving down the highway, this whole stream of women with these huge bundles of wood on their head. So like that, the woodcutter had to work very hard, but he still lived in very kind of poverty because it wasn't worth it. So a holy man happened to be coming by, and he told him, go deeper. And so then the next day, when the woodcutter went back to the woods, he said, well, the holy man said, go deeper, so let me go a little further into the forest. And then he found a grove of sandalwood trees. So the sandalwood was much more valuable than ordinary firewood, so he was able to sell it and make a good profit. Then a little bit later, a few days later, he began thinking that the holy man said, go deeper, but he didn't say, stop at the sandalwood. So he searched deeper, and then he found a gold mine, and he went further and further. Like that, the deeper he went, the more kind of wonderful things he found. So like that, Shalaka said, we're all, in this world, we all tend to be like children. We're playing with little bits of glass, oh, we got a raise, or I got a new BMW, or this or that. We're all kind of playing with it and enthused about it, not realizing that there's fantastically wonderful treasure hidden within ourselves that we were not even looking for. And there's those people who had some experience, they see that the joys and the pleasures and the things that begin to unfold from the soul when you make contact with it are far beyond anything we can even imagine. If we were to sit down and make a list of all the most wonderful things that could happen to us, we couldn't even dream of all the wonderful things that God began to bring once we establish contact with it. And so, like that, the ignorant people, the immature people, like children, they see this world, they get all excited about it, they play with it, and that absorbs all their attention. But the wise people, they realize that all these things are temporary. The light comes, the light goes. So how many people come and go over the millions of years? And so they begin to search, well, what is more important than this? What is more lasting than this world? What is better than this world? And then they begin that inner search, which leads them to the real treasure. So immature people run after external objects, and they invariably get caught in the widespread net of death. Like I said, we said at the beginning, they start off enjoying, and when you're young and healthy and full of energy, you enjoy. But then you're caught up, and you gradually get older and older and drugged down. So wise people, however, know where true immortality is. That is why they reject everything in this world, knowing that these things are short-lived. So it is by this self that a person knows form, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. What else remains that the self does not know? In other words, because the self is all-knowing. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So this truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. And this final line will be in a number of the verses coming up. Remember, Nachiketa's question to Yama was, after a man dies, some people say he continues to exist, some say he doesn't, and he wanted to know the answer. What's the reality of the person? And in these next verses, this line will be there. This is the self. What they're describing here, this is the self that Nachiketa was asking about, wanting to know what's the reality? Who am I? What's the reality of people? And it is this self. So it is by this self that a person knows form, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. What else remains that the self does not know? Because the self is all-knowing. And this is truly that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So people think that the sense organs are independent. They are not. The whole body-mind complex is dominated by the self, and the sense organs function because of the self. The mere presence of the self is enough to make them work. When a person dies, all his sense organs may be intact, yet they do not function as they derive their power from the self, which is pure consciousness. Because the self is pure consciousness, it is all-knowing. The self is the subject, and everything else is the object. The function of the sense organs is to make us conscious of the things around us. But an object cannot know another object. Objects are all inert matter. and so also are the sense organs. Matter cannot feel or see, but associated with the self, it gives the impression that it is feeling or seeing. For instance, a heated iron ball can burn your skin, but the ball itself does not burn you. It is the heat in it that burns. So the self is behind everything that happens in this phenomenal world. In fact, this world itself is a manifestation of the self. Nachiketas' subject of inquiry is this self. So in other words, behind everything that happens is the self, or what do you call it, a pure consciousness. Now, our experience of knowing things is very limited. We know things, we read a book, or we listen to a lecture, we have a little bit of storehouse of knowledge inside our brain, but it's really very, very small. But now, one of the basic qualities of God, which every religion, when they speak about it, one of the basic qualities is omniscience. He knows everything. And he has to know everything because he's the consciousness within everything. From an amoeba all the way up to the gods and goddesses, he's their consciousness. And he's more than that because he's the consciousness, the one and only consciousness of everything, this entire universe. He is in a manifestation of that consciousness, and everything is pervaded by it. And in order to understand this, we used the example before how when we think of God as the creator, we tended, at least from in Christianity, Western background, when you think of God as creator, you tend to think, okay, he created the world and he put it here and he sits in heaven and he runs it like a big administrator, a big king. Yeah, in other words, we're creatures, he's the creator, and we're creatures. And so our job is to know, love, and serve God, to be a proper creature, and then we can go to heaven. So this is, for the average person, this probably is kind of the idea. But in Hinduism, in Vedanta, particularly in Advaita Vedanta, and in Hindu scriptures, there's a different concept of creation, which is more like the mental creation of a writer, a novelist. Novelist, he creates a whole world full of characters, full of people, full of action, full of the plot and everything else. But this entire creation, this entire world is contained within his mind. Now, if the characters in that novel were to search every single person, every single object, everything in their world, trying to find who made me, they wouldn't find anybody. They wouldn't find any single person or object or anything in that world, that fictional world, that was the creator. But yet, all the time, their creator's consciousness is right where they're at. Because they're being created, they're actually ideas within the mind of the creator, of the novelist, and his consciousness is what's sustaining them. It's pervading everything, everywhere there. It's right there, closer than anything else. But they don't see it because they're looking, examining the other people and the other objects there. Not really that underlying all of this is this presence of consciousness. And that consciousness is called Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic mind. So that one consciousness contains all the universe, all the beings, all the individual, everything is contained within that one consciousness. But we won't see it through our eyes. We won't see it outside. In the external world, but at the same time, it's closer to us. I think Tennyson says, it's closer than hands and feet, closer than breathing. As soon as a person becomes aware of God, you go, oh, it's right here. It's so close to me because it's my own inner self. It's the consciousness within me, which is saying, okay, I'm so and so, I'm having this experience, I'm having that experience. Is realize that the consciousness, which is saying that is the consciousness of God Himself, and it's right here where I am. And so when we focus on the externals, we're focusing on the objects. And I say that we can search all over this world, we won't find anybody who would say, okay, this is the Creator. When we do find in incarnation, an avatar, or a guru, or a great spiritual being, what you're actually seeing appears as a human being, appears as a physical person, but what he actually is somebody who's made the connection with that consciousness, and now that consciousness is flowing through this body. The body, then his particular body is just like an instrument for that spiritual consciousness. The guru power, the spiritual power, that kind of the wonderful, the kind of spiritual presence that you feel from the person isn't coming from the person. It's coming from the divinity, which is, because he's made the connection, is now able to flow through him. Anytime a person realizes God, it allows God to actually flow into the world, to function into the world. And it helps and uplifts everybody in the world. And so, but it's not because of the object, because of the particular body that's there, or the particular form. It's because of the divinity, which is now able to fully express itself. All of us are being kind of driven or empowered by prana, the basic life force of the universe. It's like there's one universal power, electricity, in the whole universe. But when you are able to connect to that electricity, then what you will do will depend on what kind of object you are. If you're a CD player, you'll play music. If you're a vacuum cleaner, you'll vacuum the floor. If you're a frying pan, you'll cook things. Like that, each individual in this world, we're like different instruments. And as soon as we connect with the divine, with the prana, with the source of the energy, the universal energy, once we connect to that, we express it in an individual way. And so the guru is somebody who's made that connection. Now, even though electricity is everywhere, all pervading, everywhere in the universe, we can't really use it until we can plug into it. Until we can make a connection and plug into it. So for most of us, even though God is right here where we are, even though all the power of the universe is right here where we are, we're not aware of it. We can't use it. It doesn't function in us because we haven't made the connection. But it's once you make the connection, then it begins to flow. But it will express itself according to your own particular nature. What kind of instrument you are. You know, when I first came to Chicago, I had the idea, well, saints were holy people. They were humble, they were pious, they were this. I thought they'd all be kind of the same thing. Then I found out that all the Swamis, they have very different personalities. And even they realize, so they may argue with each other and fight, but the thing is, they have that inner consciousness. They have that, and they have the capacity to kind of communicate, give that consciousness to other people. And so, and they may be, sometimes they can even be cranky or difficult to get along with, but Swami Varadananda, when he came to Chicago, that's one thing somebody asked him about, like direct disciples, because he'd known, the direct disciples. And he said, well, they all had different personalities. Some were very friendly, very approachable. Some were kind of very aloof, very hard to get along with them. But he said they could all deliver the goods. And in other words, all had a capacity to communicate God consciousness to other people. Their personality may not have been that, but someone is like a defense, a barrier. They want to keep people away because they don't want to be bothered. And so, but they have the capacity to give God consciousness. Now, we may be a wonderfully nice person, very, very pleasant, very all good, but we can't give another person God consciousness until you've got it yourself, until you've made that connection. So when you see a guru or a great spiritual teacher, you see not just a person, not just the individual. That's not what's important. The important thing is he's made the connection with God. And so now God's power, God can flow through him, and it can also be given to other people, or transmitted to other people. So it's because of the self within the that consciousness within. That's why we experience everything we experience. Everything we go through in life, everything is only because consciousness is there. Now, 99% of the people, though, the consciousness thinks, I'm this body, I'm these experiences, I'm these emotions, I'm this. But in its true nature, it's pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness is equally within all beings. As soon as we connect it with this particular individual, well, it's limited. No, it's not what it is, it's what this individual is. His ability, his talent, his knowledge, all these things, whatever's there, it can express those things. But in its real self, consciousness is infinite, totally unlimited, and when it's experienced, then the person becomes, as I say, realized soul. He then knows God not just as a theory or an idea, but as an actual experience. So the self, the real self, by its very nature, is all-knowing, is omniscient. Because it's the self in everything in this universe. From the Liva, the Tainta, up to Brahma, it's the consciousness that's there. And so there's nothing that's not known. If we know it, God knows it. We think we have to tell God our problems. We have to tell God, go look at this, what's happening over here, please fix that, and so on. But actually, if we know it, God knows it because He's there as our own inner consciousness. And the way to get your prayers answered is not to keep bothering God, saying, well, I need this, I need. Never just connect with Him. Enter into His presence. If you ever get an actual connection with that presence, then you see, everything else now is okay. Everything else starts to kind of flow. But without that, then you can pray all you want, but it usually doesn't do much good. For practical, everyday things, your prayer is your self-effort. In other words, try to do the best you can, and then there's a deeper point, though, that where you begin to surrender to God. But it has to be based on not what I want, what I think should happen, what I think should do, but what God wants. Slowly, then that starts an attunement, and then things start to flow. But if you don't have that attunement, if you don't know how to make that connection, or you're not at that point, then your prayer is basically your self-effort. Do the best you can, and then hope for the best. So any questions? I mean, this is like we've just come into, this is part 2, first chapter. Like I said, this first chapter, the very first verse, gave another basic theme for this whole book, which is that God made the senses outgoing. And that's why we don't see God. We see only an external world. We don't know what's inside. And this is where the source of our problem is. Okay. So any other questions? Okay, so then, tomorrow morning, Swami Varadananda is going to give a class at the Hindu temple on India Eternal. And I think tomorrow he says he's going to be talking about the Vedas. He's going to talk about the history, and think about the culture and the history of India. And so I think tomorrow he's going to talk about the Vedas. The Hindu temple, I think it starts at 11 o'clock. 11:30? It's 11:30, yeah. Okay, so that'll be tomorrow. Then Sunday he will do the service here on meditation according to the yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. He'll do the Tuesday class on Panchama Veda, the Kathopanishad of Krishna. Friday we'll continue then with Kathopanishad. I don't know of anything else going on like that. That's it. We get starting in, we're in August now, starting in September, we'll have a new Swami coming every Sunday. And this is part, we're building up our celebration of Swami Vivekananda's 150th birthday anniversary. The main celebration will be in November 8th and 9th, or 9th and 10th. And, but starting in September, we'll have a lot of special events coming up. So every Sunday, Ian. September we have a different Swami coming, giving a talk on Vivekananda, and one nun, Svevaprana. The first nun I think has spoke here, so she'll be coming too. And we're getting ready again for the big celebration, Chicago Kali, which will be November 9th and 10th. So far we have, I think, 30 Swamis coming and 10 nuns. I've already said they're coming, including Swamis and devotees from around the world. We've invited every center outside of India itself. We invited every foreign center, and so most of them are coming. Some of them are bringing big groups of devotees with them too. So we'll have, yeah.
How many Swamis are coming from outside the United States?
Well, right now, I think some close to 10. Yeah, from outside the different countries. Yeah, about 9 or 10, something like that. So all of that is coming up, and it's going to get more and more hectic as it goes along. Om Asato Ma Sadhyamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Vidyurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, you lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Oh, peace, peace, peace.
Okay, were you? All right. I brought some pears from my pear tree in the backyard.
Oh my goodness.
They're outside. How are you today?